Hello, everyone. My name is Walter Betzel, and I'm here from ABS Group to show you a refrigerant enhancement to track refrigerant um, materials inside of Maximo. And I'm having one little issue with my screen here, so give me 1 second and trying to move back. Just one moment. My apologies. I'm going to have to unshare and reshare and find out why it's not showing both screens. There we go. Okay, so let's start again. So again, my name is Walter Betzel, and what we have here today is a fairly short presentation on a modification that we've made to Maximo to track refrigerant materials. And so,
Hey, Walter.
Yes, sir.
Sorry to interrupt. It looks like we're seeing the presentation view if you want to swap the views. At the top left there, it says swap displays.
Yes, well, there's other things going on, so I'm sorry. Yes.
Yep, perfect. Looks good now.
Okay, great. And we'll have to adjust for the Maximo. Do you see Maximo? I'll have to slide it over when we get to that part.
Right. Perfect.
Great. All right, we'll make it work. Okay, so we're going to first start a poll here to ask you some questions, and if you would take a minute or two, we'll try to make it quick and ask you whether you're tracking ozone depleting substances, refrigerants in particular, at your facility, and if you are doing this currently on paper or in another system or spreadsheets. So so I'm going to start this poll, and if you would please respond, we'll take a look and see what you guys are doing. And I'll slide this over so you can see it. And we'll let you guys answer. I'll give you about 30 more seconds. You're coming in quickly, so thank you for that. About 10 more seconds. Okay, so we'll close that poll, and here's the results. And I'll have to slide that over as well. So a little bit more than half of you that responded says, yes, you're tracking it. And then the next poll that I'm going to start for you is whether or not you're tracking them on work orders of any kind. So if you would answer that for me, that would be great. It doesn't have to be in Maximo, but I'm assuming that you're doing your work management in Maximo. And are you recording these in any way on work orders? So I'll give you about a minute there. Going once, about 10 more seconds. Going twice. Okay, let's share these results and slide this over. So this was a little bit little bit more 50-50, but again, so it definitely shows a gap that a little bit more than half of you are recording this. You have requirements to do so, and then about less than half are actually recording those on work orders. So let me hide this and let me show you what we have to do this actually in Maximo. So we came up with a solution. It was actually a request from one of our clients. So first of all, who we are, ABS Consulting, ABS Group, Genesis Solutions, as many of you may know us as part of that larger company. Our parent company is a classification society. We're a consulting arm within that company focusing on asset management. And so you can see a little bit of information about us here. These slides will be available to you after the webinar. The main objectives of tracking refrigerants, particularly in Maximo, is to mitigate and to answer to the regulatory requirements for tracking ozone depleting substances. And we'll describe that a little bit more in a moment. And to have a single system for maintenance to track repairs and to track refrigerant usage and the storage of refrigerants and other ozone depleting substances. It's easier to do it in one system. It's effective to do it in your work management system since you're typically involving a repair as well. It's budget friendly because it's a modification to Maximo using techniques that we do all the time with Maximo. And it's upgradable because we are using the techniques that are normally used to configure Maximo. The major topics here, there's two terms, and some companies want these separated, but there's ozone depleting substances, and this is defined by the 40 CFR 82. There's other related requirements that speak to this, but this is an EPA requirement that you must track these substances. And if you're not showing evidence that you know where these substances went, you buy a bottle of refrigerant, and if you're disposing of an empty bottle and you cannot prove where the substance went, then the EPA assumes you released it to the environment. And of course, there are guidelines and penalties for doing that. A refrigerant is a regulated product and may or may not be an ozone depleting substance. So there are some substances such as ammonia that may be a refrigerant, but it's not actually an ozone depleting substance. And so you see here that those still are regulated under the Clean Air Act, and there are some exceptions that don't fit either one of these rules, but still you're tracking it for some purpose. So these are two identifiers that are going to be important in this discussion. And specifically, we want to be able to track these refrigerants. We want to be able to know what assets and locations are using these substances, and we've modified screens to allow you to do that. And we've also provided some dashboarding and some reporting that you can use to help satisfy any of your auditors that come in wanting to see your records around refrigerants. The key functionality that we have here is that we're tracking any asset that has ozone depleting substance. So that's a modification to the asset screen. We are also calculating our leak rate, which is a very important part of the regulatory requirements. And we're also analyzing whether or not you've gone beyond a certain threshold of having a leakage on a system. And we'll get into that in just a little bit. We also have the ability to track the refrigerant and any of these substances that you have on site. Where are they? What's their condition? How much do you have? Things of that nature. So, so three major pieces of this. One is which assets contain these substances, what repairs have you made on these assets, and how much refrigerant have you added to these assets? Has it gone beyond a certain value? Because if you have a system that's leaking beyond a certain amount, you're required by these guidelines to repair them. And then last but not least, the amount of refrigerant you have on site. So what we're going to do next is actually go into Maximo, and I'm going to have to slide this over, and hopefully I can do that without too much damage here. Make this full screen. So this is a sandbox that we have with the modifications applied. This is Mass 8. This is also available for Maximo 7.6 customers, pretty much the same modification, but just done on that version of Maximo. As stated earlier, these are upgradable, and these are done with using modifications to Maximo that are commonly done. So let's take a quick tour here of the screen modifications. And what I'll do here is pull up some select records real quickly. I'll just pull up an HVAC unit, and this is your typical asset record, but what we've done is added a section down here where you can identify whether or not this asset contains an ozone depleting substance and or refrigerant. So typically it's both, but again, there are cases where you have one or the other. Some of the key identifiers here is, does it contain that kind of substance? What is the substance? So you have the drop down of your normal refrigerants, and some of you will be surprised that certain things that you didn't expect to be a refrigerant is a refrigerant, such as propane has an R number, and so does ammonia, things of that nature. So we've got a good starter list here. There's literally hundreds of refrigerants. These are all definable, of course. How much refrigerant is contained, and this is in pounds. If for some reason you need to change that because you're running smaller devices, you can obviously change the units. And then the allowable leak rate, and these are also editable because these are interpreted by the client who's setting this up. But these are the typical ones listed in the CFR requirement, that certain types of refrigerant systems are allowed to leak more than others. So industrial processes are allowed to leak more than comfort cooling, for example. And these are the baselines for leading up to the leakage calculations. It does ask, what kind of system is it? Slightly redundant here, but you can define this in case it's important for your operation. These are the basic type definitions. And then the last calculated leak rate. So this is read-only. It's calculated by the system here, and we'll talk about that more. That's based on the rules from the CFR, but again, these are all modifiable to meet your needs. These are based on the last 12-month repairs that involved refrigerant, and that's based off the Maximo work orders. So if you have added refrigerant replacing something that leaked out, it will be calculated on a 12 months basis. After that, it's not included into the calculations unless you modify the calculation. So let me move over to work orders real quickly. And then we'll come back to inventory. So likewise, I've got a couple of staged work orders here where we did some repairs, and we'll take the chiller here, for example. Again, the asset is a chiller. Certain pieces of information carry over to the work order, and you'll see that there's an ozone depleting substance section down here. This just has the markers. Whether or not it contains an ozone depleting substance and or refrigerant, again, most of the time those are both marked. This is carried over from the asset record, and then the technician has a marker that they can mark here for easy searching whether or not we added refrigerant. So that way you can quickly find these records, because you may have repairs on an HVAC system that does not involve refrigerant. You'll see that there's a special section here for answering questions about this repair, particularly if it does involve refrigerant. Was it a major maintenance? Was it minor? Did you isolate any leaks? Yes or no? Was the was the unit being pulled out of service? Did you dispose of the unit? Was the refrigerant changed or removed in any way? And then again, it's a repeat of some information from the asset record. What kind of refrigerant is included in the asset? What's its capacity? This is a chiller, so it's quite large. It's industrial. And then if you are repairing a leak, then there's certain information that you're asked to provide, which is, what kind of method did you use to pull a vacuum on the unit? And apparently somebody's deleted that list. So this is a list of major techniques for pulling a vacuum. Did you transfer the refrigerant outside the unit into a collection container as opposed to releasing to the environment? Did you go through all the proper checks to make sure that you've resolved the leak? When you add refrigerant on this work order, then the leak rate is calculated and bounced against the allowable leak rate, and then that triggers more events, whether or not you need to have a follow-up to make sure that you've actually repaired the leak. Here's a series of questions that you answer about: did you find a leak? Was it repaired? Was it verified? If you do have a leak, then you have typically 30 days to come back and verify that the leak has been fixed permanently. And these typically are follow-up work orders that you generate using the normal process in Maximo. We did not automatically do this because not every client wants it to be automatic. And so it's a very simple process to create follow-up work orders. Let me move on a little bit quickly. The test method for identifying leaks. Here's your common ones. We pre-populated those. You can add others. And then, did you have any accidental release? And what was the amount? And what was the comments or reasoning around that release? So again, pretty tight tracking of the refrigerant and the leakage and the asset containing the refrigerant. So these are pretty much survey questions that are typical for this kind of work. So we put these on a tab to keep them all in a nice area that only relates to refrigerant type work. When you add refrigerant to a system, this is going to be recorded just like any other material inside of Maximo. We did not have one pre-populated here because literally it's just saying that we added R22 and how many pounds and what storeroom did it come from, things of that nature. Last but not least, and then I'll open up for questions here, is what do we do with new, used, and contaminated refrigerant? Typically what customers have done that have put this in, they like having those separated in the storeroom. So you'll actually have, in most cases, 3 records for each kind of refrigerant. And here's an example using, for example, refrigerant 410. You've got new, used, and then staged for disposal. So again, you always have to be able to prove where the refrigerant's at, whether you have fresh refrigerant to use on repairs or whether you have reusable, non-contaminated refrigerant that you pulled out of a system, cleaned it up, and made it available for reuse. Some companies choose not to do that. It's a little bit of a risk involved. But then you have the one that is contaminated and you're sending it off-site for disposal. So they're keeping track of that as separate item numbers in inventory. So it's very clear that you have X number of pounds of new and X number of pounds that are waiting to be disposed of, and you can prove where it is. There's different approaches to this, and this is all modifiable, but this seems to be the cleanest approach that companies are liking, and that way they have an easy, quick visibility of what inventory is available. And other than that, it's a pretty typical inventory record, and it operates just like any other material in Maximo. All right, so let me recap here a little bit and I'll show you the dashboard. We do have a starting dashboard here saying, here's a list of work orders that involve assets that have refrigerants or ozone depleting substances in them. So if there is somebody specifically looking for any kind of activity, it's here. And then we also have a simple listing of those refrigerants that I was just referring to. Here they are, and um, do we have any particular activity around those items themselves? Obviously, these are all modifiable. You could put quantities on hands right on this dashboard and things of that nature. The other links are just going to the specific screens. For our sandbox, we actually had separate clones of the original screens, just so we have the originals and the clones. Most of our customers simply modify their main screens and do not have the clones, but that's a preference that you guys would have in using this. And then inventory is inventory as far as looking at the quantities. So in a recap, that's what we have here is a solution inside of Maximo to track refrigerants, track the assets that contain refrigerants, and then tracking where are the refrigerants. Are they in an asset? Are they in storage? Are they refrigerants that are new, used, or staged for disposal? And that way, if you do have an auditor come in, you can prove that here's all the refrigerants that we've used for the last year, the last couple of years. Here's where they are, and we have control over those types of materials. So I'll open it up for questions. I already see one again asking about the leak calculation. Is that modifiable? It's absolutely modifiable. Again, it's a configuration in Maximo that we put in place, and these are all tools that are changeable over time. So you can change the rules about when is something considered a leak, what time frame, what parameters. All of those are modifiable, and they're all upgradable as well. So let's see. And I'm looking over the questions here. So the one question is about the conversion from new to contaminated. The way that operates is, let's say you repaired a leak and you put in new refrigerant into an asset, but during the repair you had to remove all the refrigerant. The refrigerant coming out is going to be considered contaminated or considered used at least. Again, we have three categories: one new, one used, but okay to reuse. And there's different parameters that your technicians will use to say this is safe to reuse versus it's not safe. In other words, if there was a compressor burnout and you have acid in the refrigerant, you don't reuse it. So the refrigerant coming out is returned to the storeroom as either used but able to be reused or disposal. So it's all done by the technician. They're returning back to a certain item number, which defines whether it's used or contaminated, and that's how it's converted. It's not like there's a special function that you're using. You're either putting new refrigerant in or you're removing out refrigerant that is either okay to be reused or not okay. So it's collected for disposal. Another question is, are there any preset KPIs or reports? There is one report that tracks the refrigerant usage for assets, and you can filter that just like any other Maximo report and look at certain areas, certain assets, certain time periods. And there's really no separate KPI because we chose to put that on the work order and on the asset record itself, particularly the asset leak rate is right on the asset record. That way you don't have to run a report and calculate it on the fly. It's much faster to put it right on the asset record. And plus you can search for those very, very quickly. Are there any leak rates that are beyond the allowable limit? things of that nature. But obviously any KPI could be written, and it's very easy based on the design that we used. And another question is, if the building is LEED or WELL certified, how can the refrigerant be tracked in compliance with WELL rating standards? Well, simply put, you can apply those standards to any kind of calculations that are in this solution. Again, it's open, and so you can modify it. If need be, you could even replicate some of these fields. So if there's more than one standard or more than one leak rate calculation, and if you need to capture that and display that, you absolutely could do that. We placed one in here because that was the main focus, is so you could actually calculate a leak rate based on the typical calculations. But yes, if you have a different standard or a different interpretation of the standard, then you can modify that calculation and it will display. Again, some people use different time frames. The one that we're given is 12 months, but some companies will actually extend that out further based on their own interpretation of the standard. Okay, good questions. Again, all of these are around what is here and what's the possibilities around this solution. And we've only got a couple more minutes. There's typically a lot of questions around how do I apply my definition of refrigerants and ozone depleting substances. And there's also been some customers that notice that this is a strong solution for tracking these substances, but can we use this for tracking similar type substances such as chemicals and other things that are not refrigerant related? And you could take this approach and use that for tracking other kinds of substances that are either tracked for safety reasons or for some other reason that's not with the EPA for this kind of standard. So it's an approach that could be modified and used for other purposes. So just to recap, so this is a modification to track refrigerants, ozone depleting substances on the assets on the work order. So it's got what we call surveys around the details of that repair if it does involve refrigerant, particularly around identifying leaks and whether or not you lost any refrigerant during the repair, because you're not supposed to. It's supposed to be captured. And then whether or not it was replaced with new refrigerant, what did you do with the old refrigerant? What was the details around the handling of those refrigerant? That's really the focus for the modification. So we got one more minute here, and if there's no other questions, I want to thank you for listening to this, and please contact us if you're interested in this solution. And the slide deck will be available to you, just like the other webinars that are being presented during this time period with this series. So again, thank you, Walter Betzel from Genesis Solutions, ABS Consulting, and we thank you for your time. Have a good day.
Thanks, Walter. See everybody in the next session.